So welcome to semester 3, where we enter into the Mahayana. But before we start, let's set our motivation and consider our this time to reflect upon and work upon our spiritual path in terms of trying to do what we can to be better, to become better, maybe eventually to achieve enlightenment or Buddhahood, and through that being able to benefit all beings, not just those we like, but all beings completely, without any um, freeing them from suffering, but without any pushy, if you like, any pushing. So it's a gentle liberation for all beings. And may we listen carefully in order to speak carefully. I'll do my best to express this discussion. So on today's talk, we're moving, in fact, altogether now, we're moving from paths of Buddhism that are having up until now shared with all traditions, Four Noble Truths and so on are shared by all traditions of Buddhism, into those which are only shared, only adopted by the Mahayana traditions. So before we go into the actual text, it might be a good idea to explain a little bit about what that means, because Je Rinpoche sort of, although he goes into some clarity, some points of clarity, he sort of assumes that the people listening to this already know or have some idea about the distinction between Mahayana and Theravada and so on. So in the very early tradition, I think it possibly the Abhidharma, it's found in the Abhidharma commentaries, and certainly in some of the early Nikaya schools, the very early schools of Buddhism from maybe 300 BC or 400 BC, there came the idea of the three vehicles to Buddhahood, and this reflected some of the sutras that were taught by Buddha and that are found in the Pali Canon. So one of these was the path of the Bodhisattva Buddha, and this was, or the Samyak Sambuddha, and this is the path that Buddha himself took. And within the Theravadan tradition, or in the Pali tradition, the Samyak Sambuddha achieves a very, very rare and special enlightenment, a final state beyond all suffering, but having this particular quality of being able to spontaneously and accurately determine the correct teaching for each individual and the right and the best way or approach to liberation. So the other quality of a Samyak Sambuddha is a fully enlightened. Samyak Sam just means fully enlightened Buddha. Is that he took the Bodhisattva path. He trod the path to Samyak Sambuddhahood by slowly over many eons, many in fact even three cycles of the universe, developed his understanding and honed his compassion in and within the a Theravadan tradition, they say he delayed his nirvana in order to be able to teach Buddhism in the where it had never been taught before. So to turn the wheel of the Dharma, and this is one of the qualities of a Buddha, of a Samyak Sambuddha or Bodhisattva Buddha, is they're able to introduce Dharma where Dharma has not yet been established. And this is the distinctive, and everybody agrees, this is a distinctive mark of the fully enlightened Buddha. Now, within the Pali tradition and the Theravadan tradition, the idea is that the final resting state of a Buddha is peace. Whereas in the other traditions, such as the Tibetan Mahayana tradition and other Mahayana traditions, what one finds in Chinese, for instance, and also Indian Mahayana traditions following Asanga, is that the final state of enlightenment, the very, very final state of enlightenment, is actually not peace, but dynamic. There's a very, very slight distinction here, which is something that possibly we don't need to dwell on because it doesn't really affect us in our day-to-day actions. But what is important is that the way in which these three paths possibly lay out do sort of have some resonance to us, and we need to consider them a bit more carefully. So one of the aspects of this is the Bodhisattva Buddha, or the Samyak Sambuddha, is the historical Buddha who trod the path of a Bodhisattva, leading to his arising as the Buddha that we know of, is introducing Dharma. So this is known as the Bodhisattva path. And then there's also the Pratyeka Buddha path. This is a Pratyeka Buddha, means a solitary Buddha, a solitary realizer. And the Pratyeka Buddhas are recognized as individuals who have decided to tread their path to enlightenment on their own. It takes a long time because they don't have any teachings to follow, but they achieve through their understanding enlightenment. So it's a particularly rare form of Buddhahood, but and it involves generally shunning, keeping away from society, and finding a very strong resolution to achieve peace. But Pratyeka Buddhas, having reached nirvana with a very powerful enlightenment, having done all the work themselves on their own, have not a very strong interest in doing anything other than escaping samsara. So having escaped samsara, then they remain in peace in this state of nirvana, where they're not, which is a non-dynamic state. Then the other, is not last, is like the other path available is known as the Sravakayana, the Sravaka path, or the path of the student, and the path, or the listener. Now the listeners or the students are those who are the students of Buddha, the direct students of Buddha, disciples of Buddha, if you like, followed the instruction he gave initially, which was to achieve nirvana from listening to the Four Noble Truths and practicing the Four Noble Truths, understanding the Four Noble Truths, and escaping from samsara. So for the Sravakayana, of which the remaining school is, I think, the Theravada, there are several different schools historically. There may be some others. I'm not very sure. In the Sravakayana, the final goal is said to be this peace, the peace of nirvana. So certainly in the Theravada tradition, but the Sravakayana itself is actually seeing, it is just being concerned with escaping from samsara, not benefiting all sentient beings. Now, the reason given by the Theravadins for this is not the same as the reason for that the Mahayana other traditions may give, in terms of the fact that they say that there's only so much that one can do in the short time that one has between achieving peace and dying, or arriving at nirvana, and therefore they just say it's best really for us to do what we can while we're alive, and then at death, then we go into nirvana. And they say that the Bodhisattva path primarily is a very long path, and then even still, one is only able to teach in that final life. So this is the Sravakas, they're like the Theravadins, and those who follow, whose goal is nirvana alone. The Pratyekas, who are the solitary realized, their goal is nirvana alone, and the Bodhisattva Buddhas, whose like the historical Buddha, whose goal is to teach Dharma and to liberate all beings. So there are some distinctions in terms of different schools about how this actually works and what the distinctions are. But the Mahayana traditions, which is almost all of Tibetan Buddhism and Buddhism in Nepal and in China and in Japan and so on, and Korea, all of these countries, and Taiwan, all of these countries, they have except the Mahayana traditions, which are found through a sangha in um, in India and other teachers. So the point about this is that the Mahayana means the great vehicle, because it is considered to be the great vehicle. It is the vehicle that Buddha himself chose, and that it leads to liberating all sentient beings. Now, while the Theravadins disagree, and they say um, um, uh, the final place of existence, if you like, is paranirvana, is a space of a place of rest. The Mahayana Buddhists say that actually, once one is a Buddha, one never rests. But one is effortless. So it is effortless, but one is not in a state of rest. One is always dynamically continuing to teach Buddhism, or to teach not Buddhism, to teach the path to enlightenment. So this really is just trying to provide a bit of background in terms of what Je Rinpoche is now going to be looking at, which is regarding how the distinctions are to be made between this mind of enlightenment, which is found in the Buddha. Now, the Bodhisattva path. I've been using the word Bodhisattva path and the Bodhisattva Buddha. What does Bodhisattva mean? Well, body means enlightenment, and sattva means being. So one could argue really that all of these Buddhas, these paths, are enlightenment being, but we could also argue that all of them are also Shravakas or listeners. So this, in a sense, is being used as a name, and the name here is referring to the fact that one is set on, Bodhisattva is set upon full enlightenment, the full Samyak Sam Buddha enlightenment. Similar to that of the historical Buddha, regardless of whether or not there is this quality or that quality, whether or not they're dynamic or static. This we can find out when we're there, right? I mean, we don't need to worry about that. But what we do need to worry about is this idea, or we don't need to worry about, but what we need to consider is that the path, the Mahayana path, is a path that frees us from suffering, just like the other paths. It's a path of liberation, but also benefits other beings directly, especially where the teachings of Dharma has not been found. So it is true that sometimes we'll find the text might be a little bit like the Shravakas have less compassion. It's not really necessarily the case that there's less compassion, because these are arhats, these are enlightened beings, but the path that they adopted, or the path that they chose, was the path of a Sravaka. So I don't feel I want to get involved in any dispute with anybody who has the will and energy to follow the path to enlightenment, and certainly not to criticize them in any way whatsoever. Again, Lamrim is very much a path of inclusion in this sense, as I said back in February. So let me start with what Je Rinpoche has to say. So sorry, I need to finish this. So bodhisattva is a being set on full Buddhahood, yeah, and therefore the mind that we generate within us, the motive to say, I want to be a Buddha, I want to benefit all sentient beings, I choose to take on the burden of the suffering of all sentient beings. By becoming a Buddha, is bodhicitta. And this body again means enlightenment. In this shortened sense, it means the full enlightenment of a Samyak Sambuddha. And Chitta means mind. So bodhicitta is the mind of enlightenment. Body is enlightenment. Chitta is mind, and a being, a person or being who holds or who has that motive is a bodhisattva, a being set on enlightenment. So these terms, I think, is exactly what Je Rinpoche is going to be talking about. And what I want to do is to be just very clear, and I might remind us, for those of us who are not too familiar with these concepts, what these different terms really are. So Je Rinpoche has just finished with book 1, and he's saying, well, now after this time, we should have some experience of the faults of samsara, cyclic existence, normal conditional universe, from various different perspectives. We will have recognized the truth of suffering, the causes of suffering, and both through understanding delusion and karma and consciousness as the three bases of samsara, and also the 12 interdependent links, which show how samsara binds us through our self-grasping. Self-grasping which arises from ignorance. So this when we recognize cyclic existence, he says, we see it as a pit of blazing fire, or I used to say a shit pit, but it's not all very comfortable. Geshe used to say something like shit pit, but a bit less rude, I guess. So he said, when we see this, when we recognize this, then we will develop this strong determination to be free of it, to attain a liberation, to be free. Literally, the word liberation means to be free of, and we want to to attain liberation. And it itself, this freedom, is the elimination of suffering and the afflictions, these mental delusions that cause us so much trouble. We know that, or we are learning that the path of the three precious trainings, or the three higher trainings, as they're sometimes called, of ethical behavior and concentration, meditation, and insight, provides us with this path to liberation. And this therefore frees us, this liberation frees us from cyclic existence, and it is indeed irreversible. So he's just making it clear that from our previous understanding, we should have some clarity about the innate nature, suffering nature of samsara. In fact, also its impermanent and empty nature of samsara, but we're mainly concentrating on its suffering nature, and then and the Four Noble Truths. He says, but this is the point he's saying, however, your elimination of faults and attainments of good qualities will be incomplete. And the reason why he says this is because we will not necessarily, just by practicing to free ourselves from samsara, we're not considering the freedom of all sentient beings. So he says, therefore, you will not have accomplished your own aims, and will only be able to accomplish the purposes of others in a limited way. That's what I'm saying. So only in a very simple way, or a less qualified way, as an arhat, as a Sravaka Buddha or a Pratyeka Buddha, can we help all beings, just like everybody agrees with this. So so therefore, he's saying, and he says, we don't accomplish our own aims because we're not in the final state of Buddhahood. Having found peace, we remain, if you like, only in a position of peace. So there is this idea then that with and this is a Mahayana idea. It's only found in the Mahayana traditions and Mahayana sutras, that when a Sravaka Buddha or a Pratyeka Buddha are resting in nirvana, eventually a Buddha comes along and says, "Okay, now you need to work for all others." So therefore, he says, it's like, well, since we are going to be woken up by a Buddha in the future anyway, why not just enter into the Mahayana from the beginning? And therefore, he says he then quotes from Arya Sura, on the Compendium of Perfections, again a Mahayana text. Once you've abandoned the two lower vehicles, these being the Sravaka and the Pratyeka Buddha, which do not possess the power to provide welfare of the world, enter into the vehicle which Shakyamuni himself taught and lived, and this which only consists of helping others or helping the world. So again, is like saying when we recognize, and this is also from the same text, when we recognize that beings are in a state of degeneration due to the thoughts of delusion, and that joy and unhappiness are merely like a dream. Why would we only strive for our own welfare, when we could actually forsake or uh, not take delight in the deeds of altruism? In other words, follow the Mahayana path. So then Jeremy Bichet says, when you see that beings have fallen, stumbling around, in the just like ourselves in the ocean of existence, unable to walk in a safe direction or even in a straight direction because our eyes of wisdom, this is not some sort of hole in the head. This is the ability to distinguish between what we should be doing, what we should not be doing, um, because the eye of wisdom is closed. um, is it not better to care for others and strive for their welfare, right? So when we begin to recognize, even when we begin to recognize samsara for what it is, he's saying, then we can also recognize the suffering of others. And in that light, this is a great, excellent opportunity for us to develop our altruism, our understanding of their needs, our empathy and compassion towards them as well, and wish to help them. So again, he says, Je Rinpoche says that basically looking after ourselves is a trait that we find with animals. Looking after yourself is looking out for number one is not particularly human. It's not particularly special. It's found everywhere. All beings have this quality. What is rare is responsibility and shouldering responsibility. What's particularly less rare is shouldering the responsibility for possibly one's offspring or one's immediate family. But even this is quite rare nowadays. There are many people who don't even do that. And then again, we find people who are trying to be responsible for larger groups of people, and then there were very few people who take on a view of wanting to um, shoulder some responsibility for the world, not necessarily taking on being the world boss king, but also in terms of thinking this view that these people have in the world is wrong and it needs to be changed. So, for instance, people like Gandhi or Martin Luther King, Gandhi, who is looking to introduce the idea of being able to look after their own nation, and Martin Luther King, who was pointing out the incivility of racism. So these sorts of things, and there are many others. I mean, and even now we have a young Greta Thunberg who's showing us and reminding us of the importance that we have in terms of looking after the planet rather than just squandering its resources. So we can see that shouldering responsibility is not something that requires age or maturity. It's not something that necessarily requires anything more than a very, very strong determination, a passion, uh, um, and a strength and a will to continue to work on the particular message. Now, in these cases, they all became well renowned, but it doesn't matter if we become well renowned or we become completely unknown. This isn't necessarily important. What's important is what we do in terms of thinking about shouldering the responsibility of others. And then when we think about that, we begin to really, our fundamental orientation, which is the same as these other people, these great people who focus on a global change, if you like, is the happiness and benefit of others. And I think that's really important. Is that I don't think in any of these cases that that I mentioned, and many others, that any of these people were really concerned about themselves or how it would affect them. They're thinking about their communities, or they're thinking about the world as a whole. So we can see that this is definitely meets these qualities in terms of that. And then Je Rinpoche cites from Chandra Gomin, an Indian Mahayana practitioner, who says, if we think about the sun whose rays shine everywhere, or the ground that supports the world without calculating the burden all the time. Such is the nature of people of great capacity who lack any self-interest. They're consumed with whatever brings happiness and benefit to the world. So certainly in some cases this is in accordance to their own particular passion, but also in terms of their own particular insight. So having had this remarkable insight, they then wish to share it in a way which is hoping to change, for other people to recognize that same insight and take it on. So once we so this sort of idea about seeing the torment or a needless distress being caused by others through a wrong view or through mistaken understanding or through other reasons, then and they wish to do something to address this, then these are known as people of great capacity or adepts. And he again is citing Chandra Gomin here, and who says exactly this. He said the effort, Chandra Gomin says the effort in terms of making a difference is like their own heads are on fire. They're so driven that it's the same sort of energy that we would give as if our heads were on fire in terms of trying to make a difference in the world. So then this is what Je Rinpoche is talking about here is the Mahayana distinction, which is the idea of saying that why just be a normal Buddha when you can be a fully enlightened Buddha and have this benefit on all beings. So one could say, well, it'd be good to be a Buddha, you know, and he's saying, well, it's more or less the same effort. It's the same effort to be either. So why not go for go for top marks, right? And in terms of the benefit to all beings, to everybody, then there's a serious, major benefit. It's not just a few years of teaching while we're alive. There's actually the ability to change the world in a much larger way. So he says, therefore, Je Rinpoche says, therefore, the Mahayana is the origin of all the good of self and others. It's the medicine that alleviates all our problems. It's the great path traveled by all knowledgeable persons. It's the nourishment for all beings who see, hear, or remember, or come into contact with it. When we recognize it, he says, when we enter it and we recognize it for what it is, we have this thought, it's wonderful, I've found at last what it is that I've been looking for. So it's on this mind in terms of entering the Mahayana, and again, the Mahayana is, if you like, the Bodhisattva path, the path of the mind to be like Buddha, to be able to spontaneously benefit and continue to benefit all sentient beings. The supreme Buddha, the Buddhahood, rather than merely achieving, merely I say is a bit of an understatement, achieving the peace of nirvana. It's hard to do anything, right? So we have to be careful with these mealies and stuff. Um, it's still amazing. It's there's nothing. There's if you have the opportunity to meet uh, uh, um, an advanced follower of the Sravaka path, they will be astounding, incredibly astounding, and very, very happy to teach. So we just need to understand that there's a slight difference, a qualitative difference in terms of the motive, but also in terms of the ability, the facility, in terms of the Mahayana traditions. So he says, okay, well, this is what we want to do. We want to rise to this calling, and but how do we do it? So so far we've established that we wish to that that the Mahayana um, offers the Mahayana, the greater path, the path that includes all beings, is the path that benefits all beings, and that we should rise up to this challenge and consider all beings rather than just ourselves. And it is this, in order to do that, this Mahayana, this great path, we need to learn how to do that. So what we first need to do is to recognize what the specific entrance to, or if you like, the gateway to, or the required feature in our mind is for us to be able to enter the Mahayana. And then again, how to develop that. So and then afterwards, later on, would be also how to learn how to practice the deeds of a bodhisattva, of somebody who is on the path to enlightenment, of full enlightenment. So I think most of the time now, the word enlightenment is going to be referring to the Mahayana enlightenment of a fully qualified Buddha, of a Samyak Sambuddha. So, as I said, there's also the enlightenment that leads to peace, which is nirvana, which is found with the Sravaka, or the also sometimes known as Arhat, but Sravaka, the hearer teacher, the hearer paths, or the Pratyeka, the solitary paths. So the Sravaka is a listener, the Pratyeka is on their own, and the Bodhisattva Buddha is the one who is wishing to teach all beings. So Je Rinpoche has this question, it puts this forward as a question and answer. He says, question, since we want to enter the Mahayana, as you've mentioned, how do we do that? And his response is that Buddha taught within all of the Mahayana Sutras and many other places that the only way into, well, first of all, what he says is there are actually two basic Mahayana approaches. So without all of them include what we've already covered, but within that there are also the perfection vehicle, which is the practicing the perfections, and then there's also the tantra vehicle, which is, if you like, that plus more. And he says these two vehicles, the two vehicles that are Mahayana, whichever of these two that we enter, in which we can enter both, but if we enter whichever one of these we enter, the only way in which we can enter them is the spirit of enlightenment. So this spirit of enlightenment is what is known as bodhicitta. Chitta meaning mind, or here it's been translated as spirit, and bodhi being enlightenment, again the fully qualified enlightenment of a Buddha. So this specific quality is what we need. We need to have this mind that says, I want to be a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And he said, once you have this, this is the only way into Mahayana. Once you've generated this, you are recognized as a Mahayana practitioner, even if you've not generated any other good quality. Now, what's interesting here is that, and this is more clear within the Sanga's text, is that whenever in any moment in our practice, even as inexperienced Buddhists who are still struggling to keep our concentration for 5 minutes, if we are able to generate bodhicitta, uncontrived natural bodhicitta, the sincere wish to benefit all beings through becoming a Buddha, a fully realized Buddha who is able to spontaneously benefit all beings, if we're able to do that without any lack of clarity at that moment, then we enter into the Mahayana path. And that becomes the seed that that helps us through the entire journey to enlightenment. So it might seem a very small seed, in fact, especially for an untrained person, this can seem almost insignificant, and it might feel like it has no long-term effect. But in fact, it is the seed that allows for us to become Buddhas, fully enlightened Buddhas. And he says, when we have this spirit in the mind, then we can be recognized as Mahayana practitioners, even if we have no other qualities. But when we separate from that spirit, so if we say, that's not what I am, then no matter what other qualities we have, such as great knowledge of emptiness or anything else, then you lapse from the Mahayana. You are no longer a Mahayana practitioner. And so even though this seed is there, we can damage that seed, we can destroy that seed by denying it or rejecting it or refuting it or disputing it. So this is an important aspect in terms of saying that if I have a sense of ability, of confidence in myself, that this is what I want to work towards, this is my goal, then it's quite important to retain it. Now, one sort of way of looking at that is to say that I'm only really necessarily actually engaging in the Mahayana path, in the Bodhisattva path, while that intention is pervading my thought stream. So while it's my continual thought, 24 hours a day, but that's which is in a sense also true. One can talk about being an engaged bodhisattva, engaging in bodhisattva activities from moment to moment. And that is the case when we have this bodhicitta, this mind of spirit of enlightenment in our mind continually. But that itself, that continuum of this motivation requires this initial thought, this initial starting seed. And Je Rinpoche says this point about the entrance into Mahayana is taught in many scriptures, and it sort of makes sense. He said it's quite easy to see that it's reasonable. So he then, to qualify, he says this is the only way. It's not as if it's a way. It is actually the only way. The only entrance into Mahayana is through this specific spirit, this specific idea, this idea of saying, yes, I can become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And he says a departure from Mahayana is only determined, again, from losing that. So he says then, obviously, it retains this fact that being a Mahayana practitioner, regardless of your culture, your tradition, or your texts, your rituals, your learning, your studies, your practice, or anything, um, the the being a Mahayana practitioner is solely contingent upon whether or not you have this determination, yeah, or have had that determination. So as soon as you have had that determination, then you become known as a conqueror's child, as a child of the Buddhas. And Shantideva says, the moment helpless beings bound in the prison of cyclic existence develop the spirit of enlightenment, they are then called children of the Sagatas, or as children of Buddhas. Sagata is just another word for enlightened beings or Buddhas. And then he says this has become a part of many bodhisattva, bodhicitta prayers. Is today I have been born in the Buddha's family, and I have become a child of the Buddhas. So it is. He says here that he says, therefore, you say, well, once we have generated this spirit, once we have achieved or managed to actually hold this view, this determination to become a Buddha for the benefit of all beings, then we can call ourselves well, we would be known as bodhisattva. I think going around saying I'm a bodhisattva is probably not the best thing to do, because we've really got a lot of work to do before we can talk about being engaged in our bodhisattvahood. So yes, we've met the first mark of being a bodhisattva by having this point of view just once, yeah, initially. When we are engaged in that view continually, then maybe we could say I'm bodhisattva, but one might feel also a little bit still humble until one has achieved at least a degree of one's entered into the first path of enlightenment, or even better, really, has become an Arya being, has direct understanding of direct understanding of emptiness. Then maybe it's better to say, okay, I'm bodhisattva. And he, Je Rinpoche quotes the life of Maitreya. He says, people, if they have this spirit, even if there's no other training, if they have this spirit and they haven't abandoned it and broken it, they say it's like it's similar to a diamond. He says it's like even if a precious diamond breaks, it still outshines all the other special ornaments of gold. It doesn't lose its name, precious diamond, and it still removes all poverty. So similarly, those who have developed the precious diamond, which is this spirit of enlightenment, bodhicitta, with this aspiration to omniscience, the qualities of a fully enlightened being, although they might not have any practice, they lack its application, they still outshine all the golden ornaments which the good practices of the found in the other scopes of Buddhism, Sravaka and Pratyeka Buddha. They do not lose the name of bodhisattva, and they still remove the poverty of cyclic existence. So the quality is saying, when we have this, when we've made this determination, and we don't neglect it, we don't reject it, we don't let it slide, we don't deny it, then even if we're not able to keep it going, at least when that mind has this quality of saying, I've found my path, yeah. So I found my path. My path is the path of a Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. As soon as we've been able to do that, then we find many different practices much, much easier. And Je Rinpoche is also citing Nagarjuna, who says the same in his own way. In the Ratnavali, he says, if you or anybody in the world wish to obtain unexcelled highest enlightenment, the root is bodhicitta, the spirit of enlightenment, firm as the king of mountains. Again, he then cites from, Je Rinpoche cites from Tantra to say, this tantric mandala is exceedingly secret, unfathomable, profound and vast. but it is unsuitable to teach it to the wrongdoers. And then the response is, you say this is rare. I've not heard of it. So who should be, for whom should it be explained? And the response again is, well, look, for those who've entered meditation on the spirit of enlightenment and who have managed to achieve that spirit of enlightenment, these bodhisattvas who practice the deeds, they should enter into the tantric mandala. However, those who have not attained the spirit of enlightenment should not enter it. So here he says, and this is a little bit more qualified, he says, not only have we been determined to develop this, but also we are engaging in it. We're engaging in it, he says this because he talks about practice the bodhisattva deeds. So engaging in this bodhisattva in the Mahayana practices. So one of the qualities of this is that if we're thinking, well, what are Mahayana practices? Well, there are more to come, but one of the aspects of this is to remember that if we have the bodhisattva mind, this bodhicitta, this quality of wishing for enlightenment for all beings, then when we do practices such as death awareness or karma or rebirth or the 12 interdependent links or the Four Noble Truths, then this is bodhisattva practice. Because even though it's shared with the Sravaka or the Pratyeka and the Theravadins, for instance, the motive, the purpose is a bodhisattva motive founded by that bodhicitta. So it becomes a Mahayana practice. It's still to the part to take to liberation, but the liberation that we seek is that of the fully enlightened Buddha. And therefore, any of the practices that lead to liberation, take us to enlightenment, are bodhisattva activities. So this is why, in a sense, if this were not the case, then Je Rinpoche wouldn't teach them. So because he is not interested in us learning things which are not relevant directly to us. This is a practitioner's manual. This is for us to learn how to practice, how to become enlightened. And he, therefore, rather than doing a huge volume or encyclopedia on all the different paths of Buddhism, he's saying this is what we need to do. And so we can see that Je Rinpoche recognizes that these trainings that we found in Volume 1 are also bodhisattva activities. And then Je Rinpoche talks about the Array of Stalk Sutra. So in that, he cites as saying the spirit of enlightenment is like the seed of all Buddha's qualities. So Je Rinpoche wants to explain this. He says, so when you take water and manure and warmth, earth and light and so on, and you combine them with a rice seed, all of those things around the rice seed act as causes for the rice sprout along with the rice seed. If you have the same water and manure and so on, and you combine it with a seed of a wheat or a pea, they will act as the causes for a wheat sprout or pea sprout. Therefore, the factors of earth and light and moisture and so on, these are the general causes of sprouts. Yeah, sprouts require water and heat and light and so on in the right amounts. But what we all accept is it's impossible for a barley seed to be the cause of a sprout of rice, and so on. So therefore, the specific cause of a barley sprout, is the barley seed. And the general causes of a barley sprout are things like the water and so on. So he's really talking about, this seems a bit like philosophical, he's talking about the distinction between specific and general causes. He's trying to use this analogy for us to recognize that the specific cause of the highest enlightenment is this seed of bodhicitta, is this mind determined to become a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. This is the seed that leads to fullest enlightenment. So all of the other practices that we do, that both those that are shared by the Sravakas, Pratyekas, and also those specific to the Mahayana themselves, are the general causes of Buddhahood. So the specific cause of Buddhahood is bodhicitta, the seed of enlightenment, or this mind of enlightenment, intention of highest enlightenment, right? And he says, in general, we can talk about the wisdom that knows emptiness. So the insight that we have into emptiness is a general cause, is one of the many general causes of all enlightenment. All the Sravaka, the hearer, the Theravadins, the Pratyeka, and the Bodhisattva path, all three require insight into the nature of reality, and they require us to understand the Four Noble Truths. They require us to understand the nature of emptiness in order to cut through our self-grasping. But these but this knowledge, this wisdom, this insight is actually a general cause, not the specific cause. It's the specific cause for enlightenment in general, or nirvana, but it's not the specific cause for the type, the quality of enlightenment, or the quality of Buddhahood that arises. And in this case, we have these. And then also Maitreya's in the Uttara Tantra, he says, aspiration is the seed, wisdom is the mother. And here, this primarily is a bit like, so in Europe, up until quite recently, the surname of a child was adopted from the parent, from the father, but the mother could have many fathers. I mean, they could mother more than one father's child. So if a mother had a daughter who was the daughter of her first husband, who's Mr. Smith, then the daughter will be Ms. Smith, and then later on, if she has another husband called Mr. Jones, then the son or daughter would be called, Master or Miss Jones. So the idea is saying the mother is the same, but the father's name is inherited. And in Tibet, in the 14th century Tibet and Mongolia and India, around this area, then also likewise, your nationality was determined by your father, not by the mother. And this is what Je Rinpoche uses. He says that a Tibetan father cannot have a child who is Indian, but a Tibetan mother can, by mothering a child of an Indian man. So he says again, so there's a specific cause of a child's lineage. When this is 14th century Tibetan understanding, the specific cause of the child's lineage runs from the father, not from the mother. So a Tibetan mother can give birth to all sorts of different nationality of boys, but a father can only give and girls, but a Tibetan man can only cause Tibetan boys. So this is him talking again about general versus specific, and the point about this again is that that he's saying this specific seed is this bodhicitta, this mind of enlightenment. So then again he says, this wisdom, then the insight into emptiness, in many texts, such as Praise for the Perfection of Wisdom, it says the path of liberation is the ability to be freed from samsara, upon which the Buddhas, the Bodhisattva Buddhas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, and the Sravaka Buddhas, again, this is the three different paths I mentioned earlier on. The path of liberation that they all rely upon is exactly this: is insight, wisdom into there are no others. So this is why wisdom is considered to be the mother of all of the different yanas, or of all the vehicles within Buddhism. So the three vehicles of Buddhism, of the Sravaka, Pratyeka, and Bodhisattva, or Mahayana, these three all share the same mother of wisdom, and the insight is not different. So it's a mistake, he says, and one has to be quite careful here, because one does find scholars even today who do this, who distinguish the Mahayana from the other variations according to the wisdom that knows emptiness. But instead, he says the way in which you do this is primarily is actually through the spirit of enlightenment. So and again, the Ratnavali, the precious garland of Nagarjuna, says the prayers, the deeds, and the dedications of the Bodhisattva are not explained in the Sravaka vehicles. They're not explained in the Pali Canon. So how could we become a Bodhisattva through it? Now, I would argue with Nagarjuna that in some ways one finds, in fact, those deeds, aspirational prayers, and dedications of the Bodhisattva in the life and the previous lives of the Buddha himself. And in fact, although he may not teach directly in terms of the sutras, he shows, and he showed directly how to be a bodhisattva. So how to be a bodhisattva Buddha too. So when we look at it in that way, then yes, of course, the Mahayana was found in the Sravaka teachings, but it was not taught in terms of the Sravaka sutras, and this is really, I think, what Nagarjuna is trying to say here. And then Je Rinpoche finishes to say that just because emptiness is not specifically a Mahayana path, it goes without saying that there are other shared paths as well, which is what I was saying earlier on too. So Je Rinpoche says, in general, just like we need to have a mother and father to have a child, we need to have the complement of method and wisdom in order for us to have a complete path. And the main wisdom, the main wisdom, which is the mother side, if you like, is the knowledge of emptiness, the understanding of emptiness. Meanwhile, the main method in the Mahayana is the spirit of enlightenment, is this bodhicitta, the mind to be enlightened. He says, if you only meditate on one, if you only meditate on emptiness, then you will not achieve a full enlightenment. You will actually achieve peace, the peace that's found as a Sravaka or a Pratyeka Buddha. And if you only choose, although it doesn't say this, if you only choose bodhicitta without any insight, then you'll never be liberated. You'll remain in samsara. So he says you need to have wisdom to prevent us from falling into the to prevent us from falling into the extreme of cyclic existence, of the suffering of samsara. But we need compassion. We need this quality of this mind determined to benefit all beings, to prevent us from falling into the extreme of nirvana or peace. So again, then he just had some extra citations, repeating himself here, so to be very, very clear. So, but then he says again, like once we actually understand this, and when we develop this, and we recognize the impact and the import of this mind, this particular mind, then this one motivation. Then when we actually reflect on it later on, we see there's a marvelous path has arisen. And this sense of joy and fulfillment is much greater than if we as practitioners than we would get from winning the lottery or from becoming famous or have great renown or any other qualities that would normally be the subject of great ambition from a normal person. So as an ordinary person, if you like, I don't mean anything specifically like we're abnormal or supernormal, but it's just an ordinary non-practitioner. So one of the things that we're seeing is that our understanding about what is valuable changes. What we're looking for is to see, oh, it's amazing to have this quality of mind that seeks Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. Um, and this has arisen in my mind is beautiful, far more important than anything else. And Shantideva says from his Bodhicharyavatara, this beautiful book he wrote, filled with these lovely verses, I bow down to the body of anybody who has generated this sacred jewel of the mind. And Je Rinpoche is working continually on trying to help us to get to grips with the fact that to enter onto the Mahayana path, the path that takes us to supreme Buddhahood, the path that leads us to benefit all sentient beings, that leads us to be able to teach where teaching has never been given before, to actually make a difference to the universe in a big way. This path requires, in the end, this determination, this one mind, this determination, known as bodhicitta, which is I will become a Buddha in order to benefit all beings. So he's using this quite extensively. He's going through saying these are some of the qualities, and he also talks about a teacher who wrote the source book for this, and how Tisha's teacher was he had many teachers, but the one that he held dearest was the one who taught him bodhicitta and the path of bodhicitta, and this was by far and away the teacher that he loved most or had most respect for, even though his teacher held a very different philosophical view to Atisha. So Atisha, like most and most Tibetans, follow the path of Madhyamaka, the middle way path of understanding emptiness. But Salingpa, who's Atisha's teacher, followed something called the Chitta March in the mind-only school, which generally is recognized as a philosophy and can lead us to understand emptiness, but it's more contrived and very philosophical. So it requires a certain development of understanding of philosophy, whereas Madhyamaka does not. So then Jeremy Bichet says one of the things is that because of this spirit that leads us to become, if you like, a bodhisattva, we enter into the Mahayana path, then even the smallest thing we do, like giving a little bit of bread or morsel of food to a crow that one sees, is a bodhisattva deed, and sort of particularly powerful. But if we lack this quality, if we're not a bodhisattva, then it's just a normal offering. It's not. It doesn't have this particular quality. And again, he says, therefore, when we actually start looking at the deeds, the practices which are solely for which one requires bodhicitta, such as the six perfections, but also the meditations found in Hidden Tantra, such as meditating on a deity or on the winds and channels and the chakras, it's not efficacious because it doesn't have this quality. You need to be done with as bodhisattva deeds, not just as actions themselves. And he then says, if we haven't actualized this, we haven't actually got this key point, this key mind in place, then it doesn't. Cultivating virtue and cultivating practice is a bit like trying to cut grass with a blunt sickle. It's hard work. and um, and one doesn't achieve very much. But he says if we have the quality and we're this bodhicitta, this mind of enlightenment, and we're cultivating and we're continuing to cultivate it, it's like cutting the grass with a sharp sickle. A sharp sickle, not a sharp sickle. So something that's very sharp can cut through the grass very, very easily and effortlessly, almost effortlessly in comparison, certainly with the dull sickle. And I realize I'm saying this very close together, a dull sickle, not a dull sickle. I don't know what a dull sickle is. So these things are like a sickle, you use for cutting grass, and then you need to have it needs to have a very sharp edge because the grass will otherwise just not do much. So then also likewise, he's saying if we're cultivating this bodhicitta, then it's like even when we're not cutting grass, it's like we're sharpening that sickle. And he's saying even when we're not directly practicing, when we get to do practice, it is easier and much easier for us to do. We see much better effect. And he says this is primarily similar to when we've actually actualized this bodhicitta. We're able to cut through our obscurations and our delusions and collect great accumulations of merit and beneficial wisdom, and even small things that we do become extensive, and the bad actions we do diminish. Now, it's not sort of magic. This is basically the case that when we are engaged in the bodhisattva mind, in the bodhicitta, then our thoughts are towards, we begin to develop this mindfulness or this, and this vigilance on our actions because we have set our determination to be Buddhas. So when we're thinking about what to do, then there's a tendency to think, I'm working towards a Buddha, so to be a Buddha. So then this helps us to constrain. We think about the suffering of all sentient beings, our determination, our responsibility to benefit all beings. This acts as a go to say, no, don't do that. Do this, right? So we can see in terms of our understanding and the quality of our understanding of bodhicitta is actually reflected in our thoughts and our actions. So, and then Jeremiah gets inspired by many different citations from from Shantadeva's text about how wonderful bodhicitta is and all the benefits it has and how it helps us and in terms of our path to Buddhahood. So then, this is really, so far we've covered, is primarily to do with the fact of the three paths of enlightenment, the three types of enlightenment of liberation, the bodhisattva path being the one which is that Buddha himself chose, us likewise wanting to benefit as much as possible, benefit all beings as much as possible, and help liberate them from suffering, recognizing that this is the path that we wish to choose too. We also wish to choose it, and that having the entrance to this, the ability for us to do this, is to develop that mind, to develop the mind that says, I wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. So the altruistic nature of the intent is absolutely important. We must have this sense of compassion for all beings. It's not enough for us just to wish to help all sentient beings, and it is not enough for us just to wish to be a fully enlightened Buddha. We need both. The reason is if we wish to benefit all sentient beings, but we don't recognize Buddhahood as being the best way to do that, then we could become a statesman, a politician, or a doctor. So, or a researcher, or do all these other things which we hope benefits all sentient beings. So it is recognizing the benefits of a Buddhahood, specifically, and our ability as a Buddha to benefit all beings, along with our altruistic intent. So these two combined are both required for us to achieve bodhicitta. Likewise, if we just want to have the powers of a Buddha without altruistic intent, what happens is that our mind is more interested in the peace of nirvana, and it is not being pushed by the sufferings of all sentient beings. It is only being pushed by our own suffering of samsara, which swiftly, as we go through the path, diminishes. And so, in a sense, we're left with less of a force of energy for us to continue that journey. Whereas if we have all sentient beings as the suffering that we recognize and feel responsible for, it doesn't matter how far along the path we go, there is that suffering remains. So we're working to achieve the position where we can start flipping it and turning it into non-suffering, and we're doing that through becoming a Buddha. Yeah, so that's good. So then he says, so how do we develop this spirit of enlightenment? I mean, we can say, oh, I want to be a Buddha for the benefit of all beings, or we can do it in Tibetan with many verses like Sangye Dhamma and so on. But in the end of the day, what we really need to do is to say, how do I actually make sure that I have this sincere mind? Because if it's not sincere, then it's just intellectual, and then my understanding of being a bodhisattva is an intellectual understanding. It's not real. So he says, first of all, this depends upon how it arises initially, and then also the stages of training and developing it. So which we'll be doing next week. So primarily is like, how does it arise in the first place? And then later on, we look at examining how to measure or how to determine the quality, the specific quality that we have of this mind, and then likewise, then how to actually take the bodhisattva vow. So when it comes down to the spirit of enlightenment or bodhicitta, there are some basic causes on how it arises, right? So one of the aspects of this is that we're looking really in terms of the important aspect of this is recognizing the quality of Buddha to be able to do this. So, and if we don't recognize that Buddha is the best vehicle for helping all beings, then we will miss the body part. So we need to have the enlightenment. We need to recognize that. And so Je Rinpoche says, that one of the four ways we do this is when we either have seen directly the actual inconceivable power or abilities of the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, or if we hear about them from somebody who has seen them, who we determine is reliable, and then we think, wow, this is really powerful. This will be able to make a substantial difference. So this is one way. And this way is almost arises out of this awe from having seen this or experienced this or heard about this. So this awe is what I will use. I want that enlightenment. And then from that we generate the spirit of enlightenment in recognition with our altruistic mind. So then another way to say, well, we may not have heard about this or seen it directly or experienced it, but we may have read a text, we read, the scriptures or other texts, and we've learned about this, and we think, wow, this is amazing, and from these qualities of enlightenment are amazing, and therefore, again, we aspire to achieve this. So in this particular case, then this arises, if you like, from faith in the text that we're reading, and then we have this desire again to achieve these qualities. So the first really is in a sense from awe. The other one is from faith, if you like, faith in the text, and then again, or the teacher. Then again, you may not have heard the teachings, he says, and we can develop the spirit by understanding that these beautiful teachings on the Bodhisattva path and the path of Bodhisattva are disappearing. They're going. They're finishing. We're coming to the end times, if you like, of the Buddhist of the Buddhist path, and therefore maybe I can continue to develop this and take part in this program, the project of Buddhahood, and benefit the sentient beings at this very difficult time. So. This primarily is to do with the idea of finding a despondence or despair about the end or the decline and the end of the Mahayana practice, the Mahayana teachings. So this is from a position of, if you like, of despair that we see this, and then again is like also we have the we recognize the terrible state of the world today, in the modern world, when there's huge amount of ignorance and shamelessness and disregard and everything else. And then it's like, everybody is wandering around completely deluded, completely unaware of enlightenment, or even the journey to enlightenment. And in this case, it's like, what need to mention the idea of actually developing such a powerful mind. So in this sense, it's like, maybe I need to do this, I need to take this so that I can inspire others to take on this mind. So in this sense, this is also really to do with recognize the rareness, but also the impact and the power of just the mind itself, the mind of enlightenment itself. So this is a sort of a classic list found in the Sanga's texts and elsewhere, and I think it's more really to do with a description of how the mind of wishing to become a Buddha arises from various different sources. I'm not convinced it's necessarily an exclusive list, but certainly I understand that what he's saying is that we can find the motivation to become a Buddha arises from inspiration or from despair or from awe, or from faith, and likewise because one sees a need for it, right? So so he says this, in this case, it's really very useful for us to understand what the qualities of a Buddha are, because as we understand the quality of Buddha, then it helps us to develop the insight that not only can we achieve this Buddhahood, but this is the best vehicle to eliminate suffering of all beings. So one of the reasons, or if you like, in brief about this, is to look at the idea that what makes a Buddha able to do this is because a Buddha is liberated, is free from a samsara. So unlike a doctor who is prone to disease still, a Buddha not only is no longer suffering, not only able to point to how to be free from suffering, but is also in a state of no longer suffering themselves. So what we see is somebody who has direct experience of the path knows exactly how to meet and deliver that path to others, and therefore literally cut the cause of suffering for each individual in their own language and in their own needs. This quality is really remarkable. So it's not as if there is a truth, one whole truth, and nothing but this one truth that the Buddha is speaking, sort of like on a voice of authority. But Buddha instead is saying, seeing the individual and seeing the language and the understanding and the views that that individual holds, and using the language of the student and the views of the student to provide a path that meets the student's needs without any need of pushing or pulling or changing. So one of the things we see both in the Pali and also in the Mahayana Sutras is when Buddha speaks, he doesn't do it in a way where he says this is this, that is that. He says, if you think this, then look at it like this. If you think that, then look at it like that. And there's a very well-known sutra where he says, he's talking about doing good, being a good person. He says, if there is a life after death, then there'll be lots of benefits from that. If there is no life after death, then there are still benefits in this life. So do good anyway. It doesn't matter what happens next, right? So this way of being able to talk is not that he's saying, I have the truth, but I give you the path out of misery, and that's his goal. So the goal, this quality, this ability to meet the needs of others within their own language, within their own needs, this is a quality that Buddha has. And this is why a fully enlightened Buddha has this. And this is why being a Buddha is so advantageous to us in our path. So he then also says is that it's very important for us to recognize that Buddhahood fulfills our aims and also fulfills the aims of others. It's not enough for us just to think about others. We also need to think about ourselves and to recognize that this cures us of our disease. It cures us of all of our problems, of our suffering, and gives us these amazing understandings, knowledges, insights into the world around us, into the universe. It's not like it's going to make us into super physicists or anything, but it is going to give us the ability to meet the needs of others whenever we meet them, um, and be able to benefit directly, openly, without any hesitation or doubt. So this quality is really very, very powerful and very special. But it's not just ourselves that benefit; it's also the others who we are able to engage with. So it's important for us, he says, Jeremshe says here that we need to recognize the benefit that we get from it, because otherwise we might feel at times that, that the journey is too tough and that we may as well just go for nirvana or, which is still tough anyway. But, and therefore for us to determine that we're happy, content with the choice that we make, that Buddhahood benefits all beings, both ourselves and those others. And he says sometimes, initially, our spirit of enlightenment, our bodhicitta, is not particularly strong. When we first develop it, it's often quite weak. It can be shaky because maybe we don't understand clearly what Buddha is that we're aspiring to, or or maybe we haven't quite understood, if you like, all pervasive suffering that is the basis of compassion of a bodhisattva. So if our understanding of the Four Noble Truths is not very clear, or our understanding with the nature of samsara and the nature of suffering in samsara is not very clear, or our understanding of the nature of Buddha or Buddha's ability is not very clear, then likewise the bodhicitta we take, even though we have this strong aspiration, it's taken from a position of relative ignorance, and that ignorance therefore makes it quite weak. It doesn't make it insignificant, it's still significant. But what we want to do is to develop that and then strengthen it, and we do that by repeatedly thinking about and understanding both sides of this equation, both that of the nature of suffering and the pervasion of suffering in samsara, and likewise also the qualities of a perfectly enlightened Buddha. And these together help us to sustain and strengthen our bodhicitta. But as well as that, there are specific developments, meditations that we practice to actually achieve a strong bodhicitta, which this mind, which is what comes next. So Je Rinpoche says we need to develop this based on some causes, and these will help us. One of them is to, if we can, to have a strong lineage, in this, both the Mahayana lineage, in other words, a supporting environment, but also a good mind and a precious human rebirth. To be sustained by a teacher, somebody who can help us, or at least a community around us of some sort that can support us in our journey and help and encourage us. Because nowadays it's actually very hard to find a true bodhisattva, a practicing bodhisattva. So, and then thirdly, to have this and continue to develop this compassion for all beings, towards all sentient beings. And lastly, not to be disheartened by the difficulties thrown up at us within samsara. And he says that then there are also four strengths that we can use. Is one of is our own determination to achieve perfect enlightenment. One of them also is through considering the needs, the suffering of others, and our responsibility towards the suffering of others. Then thirdly is also our predilections caused from our experience in previous lives that helps us in our journey. Which is not something that we can develop or cultivate now, but we can certainly think about our future lives. And then fourthly is our practice, the practice in this life that helps us to do this. So then Je Rinpoche finishes this introduction to bodhicitta and to the Mahayana path by saying, once we've understood this teaching in general and the Mahayana in particular, that they're about to disappear, this time is particularly degenerate, then we realize how important it is to develop this meaningful spirit of enlightenment, this bodhicitta, from the depths of our heart. And it's very rare. And then we should do our best to make an effort to practice, to learn, study, and reflect upon the basis which I've mentioned of bodhicitta, and then plant the root to sustain and maintain the development of this from the depths of our heart. We mustn't be forced by others. We mustn't be mindlessly following others. It doesn't work. We can't do this through habit or through custom or through through the culture. It can only be done through our own strength. It's not something that one can be tested for in an examination or anything. It is an internal state that we ourselves need to develop. And once we've developed it, we then have achieved a remarkable change in our spiritual progress, which will pervade through the rest of our life. Okay, so let's just dedicate any benefit from this towards achieving and sustaining and cultivating and refreshing our mind of enlightenment. The benefit of which we understand will help us to achieve Buddhahood, and it will benefit all sentient beings. And likewise, not to let it decline, and never to reject it. So this was very, very important. And then let's just sit for a few seconds, a few minutes, and consider and choose a meditation of our liking.